All right, so just a reminder, this is Total War Pharaoh Dev Diary #1. Those models look pretty cool, I have to say.
In Total War Pharaoh, just like in any other Total War, we have settlements, but in our game we introduce a new feature called outposts. We have 7 different types of outposts which the player can construct. They vary from military outposts to economic outposts and are designed to help the player in different situations. For example, one of the most interesting outposts that we have is the fort. Once constructed on the
This is interesting because it's very similar to how Empire and Shogun 2 worked with like minor settlements. I don't know. I mean, I'll let them continue explaining it, but you could capture basically those settlements or burn them in both those games. So they were actually like separate settlements, basically. You know, didn't produce troops or anything, but it was a really cool gameplay feature.
The map, the player can move in with their armies there and protect a certain territory. Another interesting example of an outpost is the monument. It is very much connected with the ability of the player to claim the pharaoh crown. In order to be able to become a pharaoh, the player needs to gain enough legitimacy.
So it looks like each settlement has multiple outposts, which is actually kind of cool. A really cool idea. But I mean, but again, this goes back to sort of the Empire or Shogun 2 concepts of minor settlements that are, you know, and then combined with the province. But in most modern Total War games now, it's regions. These are individual regions, and then this is a whole province. So then they're further dividing the regions into outposts, which is honestly a cool concept. I really like that.
Monuments are one of the ways the player can do that. They need to construct them across the land.
Sorry, I also really like how where was it here? You can throw troops into the fort, and it's not just like a combat buff or anything like that. You know, like you can add the garrison to it. Like that's one thing I think for a lot of the modern Total War games is there's some frustration with the lack of being able to customize what was actually in a town garrison. You can't build a town garrison. You can build up like more defenses. Like there's one building typically per settlement that increases the defenses, adding some more troops and stuff like that. But you can't actually customize who's in the settlement. And so this looks like a great sort of middle ground to that concept, where as opposed to just having like troops like standing out in the field somewhere. Or something like that, but being able to actually customize the outpost is really great to see. All right, let me go back.
Needs to gain enough legitimacy. Monuments are one of the ways the player can do that. They need to construct them across the land, promote their brand, and by that they can further down the line claim the crown. Another interesting outpost will allow the player to be immune for some time from the perils of the desert. In Egypt there is a lot of sand, and sometimes traveling across the desert is important. So such outposts will help the player not to lose the majority of their army while traveling. Another outpost will help the player with the upkeep of the army. Yet another outpost will help the player with the production of their regions. As we planned the game, we wanted to make sure that a successful playthrough will include a combination of outposts and buildings in the settlement in order for the player to succeed.
For Total War Pharaoh, we're bringing match combat animations back. They will be played by individual.
So that is a really cool concept. It's just like the amount of customization you can do with your regions. Yeah, usually, I mean, it's pretty cookie cutter. Generally, I think in Total War games on how to actually build out a settlement. But this just adds a few more features. I mean, it might not be perfect in terms of you know, breaking up the cookie cutter concept, but it at least gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of how a region should be performing. You know, like maybe you need to switch some of your outposts to more defensive if you're like on the defense against an invading army, or, you know, let's say you have a very secure interior or something like that, you can then, you know, build up more economic building. So It'll be interesting to see how this sort of plays out and what the changes are. But um, yeah, I really like those concepts. So match animations. I'm just going to rewind this a little bit and listen.
For Total War Pharaoh, we're bringing match combat animations back. They will be played by individual entities from each unit. The animations are weapon specific, so when an entity attacks,
I never really cared too much about match combat because I was usually always too zoomed out to really focus on what was going on. But I mean, it's a really cool concept that I think would be really cool in replays or something like that. But maybe when you have a break from micromanaging stuff, you can jump in and zoom in and sort of watch that. But I don't know. It's never been an issue for me. I know Total War Warhammer 3 lacks a bunch of that. I think the monsters might have synced combat, but I think the individual models, do not have synced combat. But I mean, that hasn't really been an issue for me. It's I'd rather have the gameplay be a little bit more tight than those minor sort of details. I mean, maybe they're big for some people, but the minor details be as focused on. But I mean, it's still a really cool concept. So I'm not like bad about it or anything.
Another entity, the defending entity will not just play a random defend animation, it will play a specific animation depending on the weapon attacking it. So there's quite a large number of animations going to be played, which will immensely help with immersing the player to the actual battle and the gruesome details of it.
It's really cool that it's weapon specific. It'll be really interesting to see how that actually plays out. I mean, all the weapons. I'm trying to think if there's any like weapons that aren't there that we'd be used to normally in like a medieval kind of setting. But I think generally, and correct me if I'm wrong, generally I think most of the weapons that they would have at that time, the Bronze Age, would generally be like the same as in like medieval. Maybe not like what's it called? A flail or something like that. Maybe not those, but very similar stuff like spears and swords and clubs and things of that nature.
For Total War Pharaoh, we are reworking sieges by adding multiple victory points. What that means is essentially that every single victory point in the city matters. You do not gain points as it was before by capturing a single victory point. You have to capture multiple to start winning. If you're on the attacking side and you manage to capture one of the victory points, that means that you will get debuffs that are specific for this victory point. The more you capture the settlement, let's say you capture a second victory point, then the defender starts losing morale because they're losing their city. And if you capture all three of the victory points,
it sounds like what they have for Total War Warhammer 3, but where there's multiple like spots to capture. But there's, I think usually it's just a general like universal sort of debuff on the losing side. This will be interesting to see if it's actually like they're showing basically that it's unit specific debuffs that are happening. That's cool, and that's better. I like that more than what the current system is. But it'll be interesting to see how it actually plays out and how that actually affects like the combat.
Essentially capture the whole city, meaning that the defenders' morale starts plummeting because they have lost their home. Another thing that we're adding for the sieges is bringing back siege ladders as being equipment instead of having them in your pocket. What that means is that you have to construct them prior to a battle, as with other siege equipment. Another siege equipment that we're adding is wall sapping, which basically means with enough time to prepare, you can destroy one of the walls before starting the battle. Another thing that we're adding is settlement destruction.
I really like the idea that there's going to be like, you have to build the ladders and stuff. It'll be interesting to see how it actually plays out. I'm a little hesitant to, declare that as like an amazing change. We'll just have to see, really how it works. And then also the sapping the walls, unfortunately, I think that's as far as I recall from the first insight for the game, the first overview video they released for the game, it was more of an action rather than you're actually sapping the walls in real time. It's more like I'm going to go have an agent basically bomb the walls, and then the walls are damaged. But sorry, that's how it is going to work versus actually destroying the walls IRL or in real time, not IRL.
Which means that you can burn down a settlement. The more you burn down a settlement, the more penalties the defender takes. But do be careful how much you burn down the settlement, because if you manage to win and colonize the settlement, the repair bill is way higher.
That's cool. I like that
Total
a
War
lot.
Pharaoh starts with some of the leaders already in place. For the Hittites, this is Suppiluliuma II, who you can play as, and for the Egyptians, this is of course Merneptah. For all other factions, you will first have to demonstrate your worthiness. This is done by accumulating first enough legitimacy, and then by challenging the pharaoh or the great king himself in a bloody civil war where all factions will have to choose between defending the supreme leader in place or becoming a pretender themselves and try to grab the throne. Legitimacy is the key resource that will allow you to start and win a civil war. It is a sort of representation of how the people measure the worthiness of a leader in that time. And it is also what historians would call symbols of power and order. There are different sources of legitimacy, and each one will allow you to win the civil war using different strategies. These are, for example,
feels a little bit like Crusader Kings, something like that, where you sort of try and usurp the throne, but then you have to have like a civil war if the king refuses or something like that. So it's a really cool concept.
Conquering lands of significant importance for your people, to capturing places of interests such as the Sphinx or the pyramids, to building monuments for your people, and even wearing certain crowns. In the case of the more military-oriented Hittites, you can also accumulate legitimacy by engaging in battles. The tougher the odds of the battles, and the bigger the enemy vanquished, and the more legitimacy you will earn. And this is the main way you earn legitimacy for Hittites. However, there's a downside. If you lose these battles, most probably the victor of that battle will be able to challenge you in a new civil war in an attempt to become the new great king.
In Total War,
so I wonder if it'll just be like eternal civil war, or if it's if there will be debuffs or something like that sort of keep the peace. I don't think there's no multiplayer for this game, so it's gonna be like only AI that you're really dealing with. But again, as I keep saying, it'll be interesting to see how it actually plays out.
Pharaoh, characters progress through your campaign by leveling up, and as they level up, you can choose to increase one of their competences. Each character has 3 competences. These are presence, fortitude, and ardor, and all of these reflect a different aspect of what it is to be a Bronze Age general or a politician. Presence. It shows how capable you are of inspiring the men around you as they fight. The second one is fortitude. It represents how well you can withstand harm, both in battle or outside of battle. And finally, you have ardor. This shows how quickly you can react and how quickly you can make decisions, again, both in the battlefield and outside of it. As you level these up, you gain gameplay effects. Presence increases the offensive capabilities of your armies. Fortitude increases the defensive capabilities of your armies. And ardor increases the speed of movement, both in battle or in campaign. Competences have another very important aspect because they are prerequisite for titles. And titles are these special names that you can assign to your character. For example, if you want to assign the title Master of Charioteers to one of your characters, you will need to have a certain amount of ardor in order for this character to take the title for themselves. You can assign the titles to an unlimited amount of characters.
I definitely like that they're throwing more RPG elements into the game. I mean, RPG in terms of like individual like stats, like these guys have like specific stats versus any of the other games in the past. I believe maybe Rome or something like that. It's a little different, but they don't generally have like stats that affect the battlefield. They might have titles or something that do affect the battlefield, but yeah, it's cool stuff.
Each faction has a bespoke variety of titles that they can use. Competences are also dependent on the character background. It's a special trait for your character that comes along with the character as you recruit them, and it affects both the initial distribution of competence points for your character and also the kind of traits that the character has access to. If a character is, let's say, bloodthirsty warrior, then this is their background, they will likely gain the trait cruel and not that likely to gain the trait merciful. In addition to that, the ancillaries have been a core part of many Total War titles. They will be easily recognized by any of the veteran players, but we're doing something new in Total War Pharaoh. We are adding an equipment type of ancillary. These are your weapons, your armor, shields, and mounts. In most cases, this is the Bronze Age, so the mount is
Just
chariot.
standard stuff.
But as you equip different types of these ancillaries, you will get a different unit as a bodyguard unit for your character. If you begin
That's cool.
with having
That's
a
really cool.
sword in your inventory, if you equip the sword, you will get a unit of swordsman. If you switch that sword with a spear, you will get a unit of spearmen. Of course, putting a bow over there will grant you access to ranged units. You can put them on a chariot and have a swiftly riding archer unit as your general. Also, it allows you to adapt to any situation that might arise
really
in your
cool.
campaign.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. There's a lot of good information there. Yeah, I mean, none of that sounded bad to me at all. I'm just curious how it's going to play out. You know, like that's the biggest thing, because I think, you know, a lot of times for these games they like kind of hype up the features and stuff, and then when it's actually like played, it's a little bit more. It just doesn't live up to the hype, essentially, or the gameplay is just not reflective of the intent. I think like the biggest example of that was the minor settlement battles for Total War 3, you know, or Total War Warhammer 3. You know, that was a huge selling point for the game. But it became such a bad grind that they ended up taking out most of them, and it was only once you built like a specific building in the settlement that you would then get the minor settlement battles back. You know, and prior to that, it was literally every settlement battle was a minor settlement like map, and a lot of people just did not like that. So again, it was great on paper, but just did not play out very well. So I am cautiously optimistic about a lot of these features. A lot of them sound just absolutely great. I don't foresee any sort of situations where it's game breaking or lackluster, except maybe the ladders. You know, we'll have to see how well those work, or how easy it is to get those, and how that interacts with the gameplay and things of that nature. Because a lot of collision and stuff I know happens with Total War games, and or bad collision, and you know, I could definitely see some bugs cropping up from that, because I think Total War Warhammer 3 like large settlement battles are already kind of buggy with stuff not working, or the famous one is when your leader has, you know, locked a ladder on the wall and is climbing up the ladder, just randomly falls and dies, and it's just like, that's it. Like, you know, like either Alt F4 if you're playing on Legendary, or restart the battle because he's actually dead. You know, that leader's dead. When really that shouldn't have happened anyways. So I mean, good stuff. I am still very excited. I'm even more excited, honestly, with some of those features. Definitely hyping me up with this stuff. All right, so without further ado, then let's move on to Dev Diary number 2.
Previous Total War titles had a weather system in place. We're trying to improve that for Total War Pharaoh by including a dynamic weather change during battle. There are a few different types
Just
of
during
weather:
battle.
rain,
That's cool.
fog, storm, thunderstorm, sandstorm, and sweltering weather. different types will each have a different gameplay effect, and they won't only change the environment of the battle, they will also change the terrain. For example, rain or storm will create patches of mud on specific places on the battlefield, which the player will have to deal with. So introducing dynamic weather and dynamic terrain change will force players to adapt to the new battle conditions. A good general must adapt their army and their strategy depending on the ever-evolving battlefield.
That is cool. That
Fighting
is really
in the
cool.
desert is
I like that a lot.
it's really hard. It's hot, it's arid, and that's why the Egyptians wore lighter armors. You will see in the game that units with lighter armors have an advantage over, let's say, a unit with a medium or heavy armor. Units with light armor have less penalties traversing sand, whilst, let's say, a heavy unit would have a really tough time just going from point A to point B in sand. Another thing that could happen in a desert is a sandstorm could swoop in and just make everything even worse than it already is. So a sandstorm is a bad place to be generally, but a clever
Really
general
large
can
armies.
use
I
it
wonder
to
if
their
that's multiple
advantage.
armies or if it's.
Let's say you want to hide your units away. You can flank in the sandstorm while the enemy's vision is lowered.
We can't make Bronze Age battles with Egyptians or Hittites without having chariots in them. The Egyptians tended to prefer lighter chariots, while the Hittites tended to prefer heavier chariots. The Egyptians mostly used them as skirmisher units, while the Hittites used them both as skirmishers or melee chariots, where they charged at the enemy, breaking their formations. We
Interesting.
have a few different types of chariots, light, medium, and heavy chariots. And there's also two uses for them. They can be used as skirmishers or melee chariots with spears. We've tried to improve chariots by increasing their unit sizes and making them a bit more maneuverable, so that will help the player use them correctly. But at the same time, we
Yeah, that's I mean, one of the biggest challenges I think in all Total War games with the chariots is that they're just very clunky and they get bogged down. I think they've fixed a lot of those issues with Total War Warhammer 3, but they're still very micro intensive, and I think that's been one of the biggest challenges with them overall, just using them as units. You can't just throw them into a battle and let them, fight it out. You have to like be microing them, making sure that they're moving through enemy units and just constantly on the move, which is really, really annoying. So yeah, hopefully what they're saying comes out and turns into is what they're actually saying. But yeah, we'll have to see.
We've increased penalties to chariots in different terrain types. Heavy chariots will bog down really quickly in mud or sand, making them easy targets for the enemy. Chariots will be extremely powerful, but mismanaging them or bringing wrong chariots to the specific battlefield will have disastrous effects for your economy.
Ancient Legacy in Total War Pharaoh allows the player to follow in the footsteps of the greatest rulers that these two empires had, to do as they did and accomplish the awesome things that they did before them. The starting point that we wanted to create the ultimate sandbox, fitting for a game in Egypt, but we wanted to allow the player to play their way, because faction mechanics have this quality where once you pick a faction, some rules are set, some rules are defined, and we wanted to spice that up by making faction mechanics choosable. That allows for a lot more variance in playthroughs. We
That's pretty
wanted
cool.
to focus not
I
only
like that.
on Egyptians, but on all of the different cultures in the Bronze Age world at the time. Yes, the game is called Total War Pharaoh, but the Hittite Empire in Anatolia has a very long history of them rising to power, at some point rivaling that of Egypt, and it was feasible that Hittites maybe could conquer Egypt at some point if they attacked. And also the land connection between Anatolia and Egypt is the coastline of Canaan, where multiple Canaanite factions exist and they have their own culture. We have two playable Canaanite factions. Each of them can enter either empire, for example, enter the world of Egypt, rise in power there, and then experience Ancient Legacy as if they started in the heart of Egypt itself. We want to make mechanics that the player can start their campaign, they can start playing with their faction, and when they see how it's going, they can choose what very epic thing they want to do.
That's really cool. I like
In
that.
Total
I
War
like that a
Pharaoh,
lot.
the royal decrees are a feature that will be easy to recognize by any Total War player.
Like
out
your objectives are not set, and that's like depending on how your game's going, maybe you want to change what you initially thought you were going to do, and the game accommodates that. So that's really really cool to see. Be interesting if you could like change it. Like okay, well maybe this isn't working out. Let's repeal back that change or that objective, and then choose another one. I doubt it, but it'd be interesting.
Out there. These are the technologies. Roll decrees take a few turns to get unlocked once you selected them, and they provide you with various bonuses and various gameplay options. They might make your units stronger, they might improve your economy, they can make your buildings cheaper or more quicker to construct, and also grant you additional slots for the gods that you want to worship in local deities.
Okay. Cool. That was a little bit less feature intensive than what I was hoping for. But I mean, the fact that the game or the battlefield changes mid battle is really really cool. I really like that a lot.